Thank you for making the time to attend today's webinar. Firstly, as we gather for this event, let us take a moment to recognize the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging of all the land we work and live on. I am Tony Boll, Chair of Deakin University's Food Traceability Laboratory. The lab has been active since 2018. It is made up of industry, government and academia, partnering to solve the challenges of supply chain level traceability in agri-food supply chains. Today we will set aside some time in our busy schedules to consider a matter at the core of protecting our brand and business, as we increasingly need to share data along our food supply chains. We are agreed that gaining visibility across supply chains will help us not only to track the product on its journey to the consumer and trace where the product has been. It will enable many value streams to be proven along these supply chains. Values that underwrite your brand, such as sustainable production, ethical labor practices, and organic certification. In order to achieve this, we need to work with our supply chain partners to ensure the security of our shared data. Today, we would like to share with you a framework for implementing protection of data in a shared environment, learn what support is available to your business, and hear what solution providers are designing in their products for traceability. I hope we can all learn from today's webinar, and I encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A panel once we've heard from our presenters. Please use your chat button to post questions as we go along, and we will put them to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to learning a great deal more about this topic. I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Firstly, we have Anurag Singh, who is a director at the Joint Cyber Security Centre, Melbourne and Tasmania. And Anurag is going to talk about the centre's work in supply chain, and in particular with small businesses to protect themselves from common cybersecurity incidents. Our second speaker is Leon Fouche, and Leon is the national leader of cybersecurity at BDO in Australia. And I'm sure that Leon will talk about BDO and what they do. And he'll talk about a recent report that BDO undertook for Ag Futures, titled Cybersecurity Threats Are We Prepared? So that's a threat-based assessment of the cyber resilience of Australian agricultural sector. So that's a very interesting topic. Following Leon, we have Professor Robin Doss. Robin is from Deakin's Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation, and he's also part of the School of IT. Robin's been working with us now for probably almost 2 years, looking at how to deal with issues around cybersecurity, data sharing and privacy related to tracking and tracing of food and agribusiness in Australia and internationally. Rianju Ram will follow Robin. Rianju is the CEO and founder of iTrazo TraceTech, and she's also a leader within GS1's special interest group for traceability suppliers. She'll head a panel including a number of our other speakers, and firstly she'll describe how iTrazo TraceTech manages cybersecurity protections for its customers. So I think we've got a pretty action-packed group of speakers, and then we'll open up the webinar for questions and answers.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for making time. While we wait for the presentation to come up, just a quick background on BDO. So we are a global accounting and advisory firm, the 5th largest in the world. And most recently, we've done a bit of research in the agricultural business around cyber risk and what are the threats to the industry. So just a quick agenda that we sort of put together, what we want to talk through. Really, one of the things that I want to bring home is talk a bit about the risk within the food and agriculture business. Specifically looking at how that translates into some of the research we've recently done for AgriFutures. BDO conducts an annual cybersecurity survey of Australian organisations, and we've been doing that for the last 6 years and contains some of the largest data set of benchmark information. And I'll actually talk a bit about some of those insights we got from that over the years and how it relates to this sector. As Anu was saying, I was going to talk a bit about supply chain risk. I think he's done a great job in doing that, so I'll probably not spend too much time on that, other than just sort of sketch a scenario of typically how supply chain risk could really compromise and really impact the sector. And then lastly, given that we're sort of starting to emerge from COVID, talking a bit about what the new norm for business is going to look like. Because as Tony was saying, this is not just about the producers of food, but it's also the whole supply chain. And I think we need to look at this more holistically and not just about the impacts that cyber is going to have on those actually producing food. So just as a bit of a snapshot, if you look back what's happened the last 20 months during COVID, and I've sort of seen 5 distinct phases industry organizations have gone through over the last sort of year and a half. First of all, sort of we started responding in the first step where we started sending our people home. Business started to really work from home. So we started to see a lot of investment in technology where organizations started adopting remote technologies, VPN connectivity was sort of set up, people were set up to work from home. So there was actually quite a quick adoption of technology. I don't think organizations probably spend enough time looking at what that sort of exposed the organization from a risk side. The next phase that we started seeing coming through is organizations started using technology more often. I mean, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, these are all common language we're all using in our casual conversations with friends now. So people started to adopt a lot more technology. And what we've seen is organizations starting to invest more in just to digitize the way they're actually running their business operations. And again, that started introducing a lot more risk into the organization where historically there was a lot of reliance on processes on organizations would check when they're sort of sitting in-house. Looking at the processes now, it's sort of all remote and it's all automated. But I think now we sort of started to come out of that where organizations are now saying, well, we've now got a stable workforce that can work remotely. Let's start looking at more retrospectively of what's the risk that this potentially started to introduce to us and the technology we started adopting. So organizations have started really now looking at a bit more risk assessments to make sure that those technologies they introduced have actually not introduced additional risk. And now we sort of getting into the whole sustain phase where organizations starting to realize the value and the benefit of having digital processes in place, that remote workforce, and that's something that we're going to continue seeing going forward. So I think it's important to sort of see how this has changed. I mean, as I said, most probably not for those producers that are actually farmers. They might not have gone through a rapid adoption of technology, but it's actually those others, the supply chain that Tony was referring to. Over the last number of years, something that I've looked at in sort of understanding how security risk has changed, cybersecurity risk has changed over the years, is to look at the World Economic Forum it's publishing a risk landscape report, which effectively saying what are those risks that are impacting the global economy and sustainability. And what we've just showed here, and you can go and look at the actual download the report. I recommend it's a good report to read. But really, what's the top risks from a likelihood perspective? And if you look at sort of those purple icons, are those that really are digital or technology-related risks. And what's interesting is if you look at what sits around that, it's quite difficult to manage the likelihood of that risk to eventuate, which means that cybersecurity is probably needs to be looked at it in the same vein. So two ways we can reduce a risk is either reduce the likelihood of that risk happening or you reduce the impact of that. And something that I think we should start looking at is really how do we look at cybersecurity, and I'm not saying we shouldn't put better security controls in place by limit that risk from happening or the likelihood of that risk happening. But I think we need to start looking at what's the impact, because we can't control where our data is going. So as I mentioned, we've done a cybersecurity threat as a research project for AgriFeatures to understand what are the threats that's sort of exposed to the sector itself, and also looking at some of the own data that we get through our annual cybersecurity survey. And that's currently in industry collecting responses. So some of the stats in asterisks that are provided here are still preliminary. But I think if you look at from all sectors' perspective, those cyber threats that are the most concerned are ransomware, data breaches, phishing, unauthorized access to information, and malware. And now if you look at how that sort of changed in the agricultural business is slightly different. And I'll talk a bit about that on why I see that's a reason why it's different. I think there's a big concern around email and website blacklisting. Data breaches is a concern from an intellectual property perspective. Malware, ransomware, theft of laptop devices. One of the reasons why I think there's a bit of a concern around some of these threats that's different to what we're seeing from a global sector side, specifically email and website. In the last year or so, we have seen a few activists sort of targeting the sector around meat processing, animal products. And so there's a lot of activist activity targeting the agribusiness. I think that's something that's quite important for you to understand where your risk is going to come from. Now, talking a bit of the survey results that we got back from the work we did for AgriFeatures, specifically looking at the cyber threats of agricultural sector, one of the things that we sort of seen come through is that only 11%, or luckily only 11% of those that responded to our survey actually experienced a cyber incident. But what's quite alarming is that of those that actually experienced the incident, they didn't know really where to get help from. And the type of incidents that came through was payment redirection fraud or invoice fraud. So what that means is effectively the organization that got targeted by those cyber criminals paid a invoice, incorrect invoice or false invoice. We've seen a lot of phishing coming through, those denial of service. Those are effectively activists targeting the sector. As I mentioned before, some of those food activists targeting the sector, and then data breach by a third party. And I think Anu already indicated some of the concerns and risks around that. The other stat that sort of come through is that only 80% of those organizations that we sort of surveyed were comfortable and confident they actually can respond to the incident. And even less of them actually had a formalized plan in place. And this is just one of the examples of some of the security controls you can put in place to mitigate or sort of manage the impact of a cyber incident. I think something that's really important, and I think both Tony and Anu were sort of talking about, we now, as a supply chain, we're a community, we're all working together in providing sustainability of food supply. I think it's important that we really understand what's the risk that is exposed to our business. And what was quite alarming is that 16% of organizations that or responders that we looked at actually had a structured way of understanding what's the cyber risk, what they have in their business. If you compare that to the general industry average. I mean, 71% of organizations are undertaking regular risk assessments. 65% of those actually have regular sessions where they report risk to their board or management. And then 64% of organizations generally outside of agriculture at least have a baseline security plan in place. And I think some of those resources that Anu is referring to from that the ACSC has put together for SMEs are some good resources to use for that. One of the other actually concerning stats that came through, probably the most concerning one for me when we did the survey, and that's often the first line of defense when you look at a cyber attack is the human element. And only 5% of organizations within the agri sector that we surveyed actually had some form of cybersecurity awareness training in place. Whereas if you compare that to other organizations, 72% of those should actually do regular awareness training. I think from an antivirus perspective, it's sort of equal across agri or to general businesses. I think then the other concerning part is agribusinesses, only a quarter of those really put in place processes to identify what are the digital assets, those systems that actually contain data and the systems they rely on. Whereas if you look at the industry, that's 3 times as much. And then similarly from a disaster recovery perspective, so if you have an IT failure, again, only around about 25% of organizations actually got those systems in place, compared to industry where, again, it's sitting three times that. So I think there's a bit of work that needs to be done with the agri sector and their supply chain to ensure that we sort of improve some of those cybersecurity controls. I think Anu sort of done a great job at talking about the risk around supply chain, just something I think for us to consider, and I don't think that this is unrealistic. I mean, if you look at the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack, where effectively hackers in the US attacked a big petroleum company, pipelines to supply fuel to a number of states, never would we have considered that would have such a significant impact to the country. So I think something for us to consider is we know there's a lot of activist activity within the sector that target the sector effectively, and they do have access to cyber capabilities. So imagine they target the sector, they get access to a traceability platform, find some vulnerabilities, exploit that, and effectively we as an industry cannot rely on that. Our international partners starting to realize this. We can't actually rely on any of the quality of our supply chain or our food, and really that's going to impact everyone in the whole supply chain. So I think that's just something we need to consider, that really it's important for this group to really understand the supply chain risk. And sort of just to conclude, something I want to leave you to think about, and it's not just, as I said, something to consider for those producers of food, but it's actually the whole supply chain. There's really sort of 4 main risk areas that I think we need to keep in mind. We have moved our workforce to work remotely, so we really had a lot of technology we started adopting. So we really need to understand managing and understanding what the risk is within that technology. And the same apply for data storage and cloud usage. A lot of organizations started to move all their technology into the cloud to really understand who's got access to that information, where's that located, is it onshore. The next one is around the human firewall. So really it's about making sure that our staff are well trained and educated to sort of understand when and how to detect a cyber incident. I think finally is really managing that impact. I think plan that something is going to go wrong. Make sure you've got a cyber incident response plan in place. Make sure you know who to contact when a cyber incident is happening and how to actually recover from that. And it's important that you sort of test that and ensure that everyone understands their responsibility. So thank you very much for your time. My contact details is there on the screen. Please send through any questions you've got in the chat. And I would like to hand over to Robin Doss. Thank you all.
Thanks, Leon, and good morning, everyone. It's great to have the opportunity to speak with you this morning, and thanks for making time to join us. As Anu and Leon have alluded to earlier, we are working in a space, if you like, that's quite dynamic and constantly changing. And the perspective that I hope to bring to this discussion is how we might be able to adopt a structured approach to deal with some of the cybersecurity challenges that we face in a food traceability context. And I'd like to start off with a big picture, I guess, a brushstroke, if you like, in terms of the landscape from a cybersecurity perspective that we find ourselves in. The landscape is constantly changing, and some of the observations that we can make is, firstly, we see an increase in the prevalence of destructive malware and its impact on businesses. So things like keyloggers or password stealing Trojans, which most businesses are familiar with, are now replaced with more destructive types of malware. So wiper-style attacks and ransomware Trojans are being let loose by criminal groups even and cyber terrorists. And to Leon's point earlier about hacktivists, we're also observing that hacktivists are adopting these new cyber weapons, if you like, to deal with the increased maturity that, from a cybersecurity perspective, that organizations bring. And in addition, we're also observing that destructive malware is now spreading into mobile environments as well. This is coupled with the whole bring your own device phenomenon, if you like, that has now reached its inflection point and probably increased further with the whole distributed workforce move that we observed in the last 12 to 18 months. And as a result of that, security risks are further multiplying, coupled with the fact that users often lack the knowledge and tools to adequately protect corporate information on their consumer devices or the privacy of their personal data in the corporate environment. In relation to small to medium enterprises, we see an increased threat being faced by the sector there. The focus of cyber attacks continues to shift dramatically towards the small to medium sized business sector, who often don't have the same level of investment in cybersecurity controls as larger organizations might do, and therefore present attractive targets. In terms of the response side to these threats in the landscape that we observe, automated threat response is becoming even more important. Attack detection and investment in intrusion detection protection systems becoming more and more critical. But the most important goal, if you like, is to minimize the amount of time between detection and removal to limit the damage a breach can do. So things like automated malware removal is becoming more and more essential as we look at dealing with threats that at most times work at machine speeds. There's also, just reiterating the point, the need for businesses to secure their entire value chain. It's not enough for businesses to make sure their own defenses are shored up, but it's important that through a trusted relationship is established between all of the stakeholders and partners that they might be working with. And since most perimeter-based defenses are ill-equipped to deal with threats that come from supposedly trusted networks, continuous monitoring becomes even more critical. And continuous monitoring is needed to combat an increase in what we term as advanced persistent threats, where attackers infiltrate networks, spend significant amounts of times within a compromised network infrastructure, and therefore are able to carry out more long-running compromises on systems and devices. And lastly, but probably a very important change in the threat landscape is the whole emergence of IoT. And Anu referred to this as well. As organizations increasingly embrace IoT to enable connected business operations and optimize their business processes and the critical role that IoT plays from a traceability perspective, it's important that we understand some of the risks that IoT presents to us as well. And I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the context of the IoT specific risk. One of the things while IoT does, while it presents significant business benefit, it increases the security challenges in several ways. Firstly, it increases the attack surface due to the large number of IoT devices that are now connected, the attack surface, and therefore the opportunity for an attacker to gain access to a corporate network or a traceability system is much more higher. They also present a diversity of threats as well. So we have this increase in terms of the attack surface, but also the diversity aspect is multiplied as well. So due to the variety of objects, many of which are in insecure and physically not secured locations, they present a significant challenge. Also, as more sensitive data flows through more connected devices in more places, and as these devices mostly find themselves outside the secure embrace of an organization or a domain that is can be termed as secure, the impact and risk is further increased. Also, we find from a remediation perspective, it's not as simple as isolating the system, addressing the breach, and then becoming operational again. As we find these systems are in most cases real-time systems, the cost of shutting it down could be quite significant as well. And therefore, the investment in continuous monitoring and protection becomes significant. Also, it's important to look at the underlying protocols that all of these devices are running in order to be able to ensure that we're not just focusing on device security, but actually going down to the level of protocol level security as well. And on the whole, the security awareness that we have is content-based, context-based, as well as threat-based as well. And there's an increasing requirement from a compliance and regulation perspective that IoT prevalence introduces challenges too. It probably doesn't need convincing to anybody on attending this webinar that traceability is actually a complex process. Traceability systems are complex systems, and to implement security is important that we are able to model the system and understand the system at some level of abstraction. And an approach to abstract a complex system is a layered model. And from a traceability perspective, as shown on this slide here, a layered model could provide a good starting point as it allows you to identify the critical parts of your system. I think Anu used the term the crown jewels of your system, but it also helps you to understand both the control and the data flow that's occurring in your traceability systems. And it allows you to almost approach security in a modular fashion as well, where having established baseline security controls in each of the layers, you can then prioritize using a risk-based approach the need to uplift security controls in one or more layers. As the threat landscape evolves, as there's improved threat intelligence, you're able to respond in a much more intentional manner. It is important to note here that security and achieving cybersecurity maturity is often a journey, and approaching cybersecurity through a layered model can be helpful in that maturity journey. It's also important to note that while the layered model does provide a systems level view, it is also important to ensure that the nuts and bolts, such as the devices, the protocols, the storage devices that are involved, and the different connectivity mechanisms that might be in place here, we also recognize those and the security challenges that they might present as well. So it's not just about having a very high level system-based abstract view, but it's also looking at it in terms of how do you actually implement and operationalize these activities. And it's important that each layer is configured to have the relevant level of security implemented. So abstraction is important, it's useful, it provides us with a good starting point, but it's important also then that we move one or two levels down in terms of implementation and then configuration as well. In order to understand threats, there are different models that are available. One of the models that we recommend and have used in the food traceability guide is the STRIDE model. The STRIDE model presents an easy to implement method of security analysis, which when, which when carried out against the layered architecture helps to identify threats and attack vectors that need to be addressed at each layer of the traceability system. And depending on the way in which each layer is operationalized, the needed mitigation strategies and security controls will vary. And therefore, this allows us to implement security controls that are informed by our particular context rather than a generic set of controls. So while a baseline set of security controls is important and useful, often we need to understand the context in terms of our traceability system to be able to implement the best security, achieve the best security posture possible. STRIDE adopts this approach around spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privileges. And for each of these, we can undertake an analysis across each of the layers. So identifying spoofing related threats at the application layer, the data sharing layer, data capture layer, and the data carrier layer, and then putting in security controls to address and mitigate those threats. And similarly, you can undertake tampering related analysis and attack vectors and threats across the different layers and implement security controls to combat those threats. As I mentioned in the food traceability guide, we have carried out a detailed analysis and identified mitigation strategies that can serve as a useful starting point. However, I do stress and reiterate that the more context specific the analysis is, the more relevant the security controls can be. Just as an example of, say, spoofing related attacks at the data carrier layer, these could be carried out by cloning or reprinting, let's say, barcodes, attaching cloned or forged counterfeited tags, impersonating device credentials, or by cloning IoT devices to bypass authentication. And potential mitigation strategies could include anti-cloning methods, use of distance bounding protocols, tamper-proof or evident use of tamper-proof or tamper-evident tags, implementation of strong authentication mechanisms, including two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication as the requirements might be. Just to conclude this discussion, just in terms of some recommendations that you might want to consider for your own systems. Firstly, the first recommendations around approaching security through a dynamic security lens. That is, organizations must adopt, yes, it's important to adopt the latest defense mechanisms, whether it might be in terms of firewall technology or endpoint security or use of security automation mechanisms. But it's important to ensure that these systems themselves are kept up to date and updated as new intelligence around threats becomes available and the configurations are responsive to the threat landscape and the evolution of the threat landscape. The second point is important. It's very, very critical, I believe, to understand the technology risks presented by new technology. The threats presented by new technology, as well as the new risks presented by new technologies as well. So as we become more reliant on the use of AI-driven methods or ML machine learning-based methods and become more data-driven, and adopt more technology, it's important that we are able to understand those risks and put in place mitigation strategies and response strategies that can respond. Just alluding, I guess, linking back to my comments around the expanded threat landscape presented by IoT devices, it's important also to approach security from a cyber physical perspective. So not just adopt a cyber lens or a digital lens to cybersecurity, but also look at it from a physical lens, and often the interconnectivity between IT systems or digital systems, as well as operational technology systems, present significant cybersecurity challenges, and these need to be recognized and addressed. Implement data protection. Often, if not always, the aim of a cybersecurity compromise is to carry out a data breach of some kind. And therefore, it's important to ensure that data, whether it be at rest or in transit, is adequately protected, whether that might be making use of encryption mechanisms or other types of data provenance mechanisms that might be critical from a traceability perspective. The encouragement is also to consider decentralization when it comes to data storage, when it comes to implementation and computation of computational activity as well, and undertake these in a secure manner as well. So secure multi-party computation and those types of technologies would be useful to consider. And lastly, when it comes to storage, store critical data on secure locations with proper protections in relation to authentication and access control mechanisms. And it's also important to consider destruction of data in a secure fashion as well, to ensure that there's no information leakage that might inadvertently occur. Just to finish off with my closing comments, in addition to the systems level view to cybersecurity, it's also important that we do not forget the human factor. And as much as possible, we need to design for cognitive dissonance. The fact that people will make poor security decisions when they are under high cognitive loads. And this could be as simple as writing their passwords down, to choosing weak passwords or inappropriate sharing of sensitive information. Thank you for listening, and my contact details are there if you would like to reach out, but I look forward to the panel discussion a bit later on as well. And it is my pleasure to pass the mic on to Rianju Ram from iTrazo. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm just confirming with the panelists that you can hear me. Fantastic, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking your time out to come and listen to this, which is a very interesting topic, secure by design, something that is very close to our heart and very important to us as a solution, a digital traceability solution provider. Who we are, so iTrazo, we are pioneers enhancing product traceability throughout the supply chain to give our customers control over end-to-end quality delivery through digital traceability. We are on a mission to deliver leading-edge digital tracing technology to give brands protection in servicing the demands of their modern-day consumers. So what our close to 4 years now in evolving and developing our platform to service the different industries to protect their supply chain, and especially food safety is a big one. Agriculture is a massive industry that we're currently dealing in. And our solution or our platform provides proactive quality management, it provides data independence, it provides supply chain transparency to marketing and operational teams. It's also managing regulatory adherence and ESG compliance, biosecurity issues that we are facing, and enables brands to manage their and protect their brands in the international and domestic markets, and mainly in international because there's a lot of product counterfeiting and food safety issues that is coming through there. So the product authentication is a critical part of the supply chain ecosystem. Why cybersecurity matters in the food and beverage supply chain? Well, security is top of mind for us as a solution provider to food traceability. As we are all aware, very few tasks today are done without some type of computer or database technology. If processes or systems fail, shut down, or are compromised by a cyber attack, business activities and many life events can stop very quickly. So what do we do as a supplier of a digital traceability solution? What are the things that we are doing or we have implemented in our solution to give our customers the comfort of how we are protecting their data and the data exchange that happens in that supply chain ecosystem? So the slide that you see up on the screen here talks about the different people or the different entities can be involved in a supply chain ecosystem. So you could be a producer, but your supply chain ecosystem can consist of, either your farmer or producer, your product could go into a manufacturer, then it goes into the distribution channel, then it goes to the wholesaler, then back to the retailer and out to the consumer. And on top of that, there's logistics and transportation companies that are involved in that entire process. And in a supply chain ecosystem such as this, you would have multiple logistics companies or different freight management systems that could be involved in the process. What we do is we bring data across from all these applications and systems, not everything that is involved in that business event, but everything that is critical for creating transparency and traceability to build that product journey or the life journey from cradle to grave. So we are bringing the critical trace events, the key data elements that is relevant for supply chain traceability. How do we do that? So through the way that our platform is developed, that we work around with the multiple different systems or that are being used in each of these supply chain ecosystem. So some supply chain would have IoT sensors, they could be using NFC tags, there's the ERP systems, there's a line manufacturing systems. There's several different players that are there, and they would have some key data element or critical trace event that we need to bring onto our platform to build the parent-child relationship for that, the journey of the product from cradle to grave. Through that, what we do is we integrate with platforms via application programming interface, APIs, open, or it's either upward or downward transaction that takes place between us and those players in the supply chain ecosystem. So in terms of when you're capturing the key data elements in the critical trace event from everyone that is involved in the supply chain ecosystem, there's a huge amount of work that goes in the background in our platform around security and safety and exchanging data between the different platforms. So this is when we talk about exchanging secure data exchange, it sounds very simple, but if you're dealing with highly sensitive data, then you need a solution for secure exchange of data. Some of the way that we enable this to ensure that our customers' information is protected is by encrypting that data, the messages or the files, and to make it unreadable during the transmission process to ensure that only authorized person can access the data. So our encryption model within our iTrust or ADI platform uses complex algorithms to scramble data and decrypt the same data using a key provided by the message sender. So this is an event that takes place between our platform and the sending, so the supply chain ecosystem, wherever we're sourcing the data from. So this ensures that the information stays private and confidential, whether it's being stored or in transit. So any unauthorized access to the data will only see a chaotic error of bytes. So if somebody tries to hack into that, all they'll see is scrambled words rather than the actual information that we're trying to get from the partners in the ecosystem. So some of the essential encryption terms that you probably all have heard of is algorithms, decryption, keys. These are some of the technologies that are constantly evolving, and as everybody's aware, as technology evolves, so does cyber threat and cybersecurity. So we're constantly evolving our platform to ensure that we have a very secure encryption model that we use within our platform, and we have different layers of security within our infrastructure. Our platform, we run that completely across AWS, so it's fully cloud hosted, which brings another edge over those running traceability platforms on premise. And to run a traceability platforms on premise, and the amount of data that we aggregating and analyzing and providing the information feedback about in real time back to our customers and we need to constantly ensure that this is not in any form or shape compromises our customers' data. What do we do? One of the huge security advantage we bring at iTrizo is by running our platform on AWS is that we are a lot of the security components already built in. There's millions of dollars that AWS is spent in ensuring that the cloud platform is secure, which therefore gives us the added benefit as well. Outside of that, at iTrizo, we ensure that our customers' data information is regularly, we have got regular scheduled penetration testing in place. We've got security monitoring and alerting both at infrastructure and application level, because there's our application and there's the infrastructure that it runs on. There's intrusion detection programs that run across that. There's dedicated resources that are monitoring the application events. And there's an ongoing commitment from us to ensure that our staff that are working on the infrastructure and application side are carrying out security, are keeping their security certifications and information up to date. We also work with the industries to support industry-specific compliance, such as FDA for food safety. And we also carry out diligent patching. There's some core, the three core elements to data security that we adhere at iTrizo. It's all around confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So if you put those and you abbreviate that becomes CIA. So we've got our own CIA within our systems that is controlling and ensuring that the data is secure, and the data exchange that is taking place between us and the supply chain ecosystem or our customers' ecosystem is protected at all times. Outside of the data exchange protocols that we have in place, the security systems that are in place, there's the other layer of security, which is about the identity and access management. Because we are onboarding customers onto our platform, we could be onboarding multiple different customers for digital traceability across our platform. We regard our platform as a highly critical application and the governance solutions to manage identity and security processes. So the identity management protocols that we have in place enable us to ensure that the credentials of whoever's accessing our platform, they're authenticated. There's two-factor authentication. The authorization is all set up, and then the onboarding process of the customer and the users on the platform is secure and approved and goes through the process that we have in place, or the service level agreements that we have in place and contractual obligations that we have in place with our customers. So there's a lot of different kind of identity and access management protocols used out there. We use OAuth, which we find that it's an open standards for identity management that provides secure access for mobile applications, Internet of Things, website applications, because our platform not only interacts with the brand, but it also interacts with the end consumer, and it also interacts with IoT. So that sort of leads on to my next thing, which is all around IoT and the difference. So if you look at this Secure by Design, the information slide you have in front of you is that there's an outer layer, which is around how the data is captured and brought onto our platform. But outside of that, there's multiple other players. So when we look at this, IoT is playing a big role in the whole supply chain ecosystem right now. And we don't supply, we don't build IoT devices. We work with partners to ensure that we can provide secure devices to our customers for deploying on farms or into the manufacturing system. So Tive, as an example, when we partnered with Tive, we went through an entire process of ensuring that we validated their device, that there's a whole series of events that took place between us and Tive in ensuring that we implemented, we integrated, we checked the security layer of the device and the messaging that is sent between us, capturing the events that we were taking from the IoT sensor that was sending to us in that supply chain ecosystem. So some people believe that, you know, I know that Robin mentioned that there's a lot of devices out there at the moment, and the issues, the security issues related to IoT devices. It's sort of very early stages in terms of where the early adopters of digital traceability are, and the farms and producers implementing IoT on the farms. So when the device is transmitting information to us, the device itself, so cyber threat, so they, in terms of the cyber attackers, they're not going out there and attacking the individual devices, because the device is only transmitting the data, and it's not storing the data. Only when it's offline that it'll store it. And as soon as the data is transmitted to us, it goes offline and that data is deleted. So there's a massive process involved between us and anyone that we integrate with, or any IoT sensors that we integrated to bring the data onto our platform, is all monitored and ensure that the process that we go through and in building that relationship with our partners, that it is about creating trust. So, you know, the whole supply chain is about creating trust, but we are creating and building that trust with our ecosystem partners, that we partner with the IoT providers, the serialization providers like GS1, as Rose mentioned, that I'm heavily involved with GS1, the NFC tags, the RFID tags. We are ensuring that these devices, or the trace tag, in what we call a trace tag input, is secure, and that we can trust the data that's coming from that, and that the data exchange process between our platform and those trace tag inputs that sending us the data is fully secure. So on that note, I think, as I mentioned, that iTransel will, I don't believe that I can take the claim and say that, you know, we can guarantee everything right now. We are evolving as a brand. We are evolving in the digital traceability space. We're working with industry partners. We're working on industry trials. We're validating and forever evolving our platform. But we are also ensuring that, as you know, there's a massive commitment from us around ensuring that our customers' data is protected at all times, and that the information that we are sharing is protected at all times. So I'll hand it over back now to Rose.
Thanks, Rianju, and thank you so much to all the presenters. I must say, I learnt some new words today, so I'll use them very freely. I know GS1 taught me about concatenation, and now I've got Cactivist. I really like that one. So thank you for that, Leon. Now, we're happy to take questions from you all. I will just preface the Q&A session by saying that one of my big concerns and the reason for this webinar today, and more work that we'll do with Robin and panelists around cybersecurity, was when Robin presented the framework for traceability in relation to cybersecurity and data sharing. And so we asked the solution providers who are on the call, how many of them actually had a good cybersecurity framework in action that they had developed themselves. And of them, 10% indicated that they did have this, which is quite similar to Leon's findings. And that really concerned us because traceability is all about collaboration and all about sharing data with trusted partners. So you automatically have a vulnerability that you need to manage. So I'm very interested in the whole thing of protection for SMEs who are using APIs that are issued. One of the things that I find out in the field talking to businesses is that they say, I don't have to worry about that. I've got an API from Toll, or I've got an API from whomever, and they've sorted that, so I'm good. So this kind of shift of responsibility when you're on a cloud-based system and you're issued with an API by your supplier, particularly in the logistics space, I think that's quite a prevalent commentary with really small businesses. Robin, Leon, you might, and Ree, you might like to make a comment on that. We might kick off with you, Ree.
Thank you, Rose. As a solution provider, if somebody said to me that if I went to Toll and they told me that they had an API that I could consume and I could get the data, I would not just assume that the API they're going to give me is going to be secure and the data that we're going to exchange is going to be secure. And that there's a process that we would go through in ensuring that we establish the relationship. We work with the technology teams, both our integration, our integration resources will work with Toll's integration experts as well. And we will exchange a set of data. We will go through the validation process. We'll ensure that the right encryption policies are used between both parties, and that the data is provided to us in the form that we want. But also that if we are promising our customers real-time information, that we are able to fetch the data in real time, and then there's no delay or latency in that data exchange process. So yes, there's a lot of that thrown around, that the word API just does not mean that if you have an API that's just going to solve the problem. The API needs to be validated. We need to make sure that it is secure. The information that is exchanged between us and use Toll as an example, that we would ensure that that data is tested thoroughly, that the data exchange, the protocols are tested thoroughly before we implement that into our production environment and say, okay, this is the tick of approval, and here we go from now here on in terms of setting our customers up for the complete supply chain traceability.
Mm-hmm. Now, I can't see any questions here. Is anyone sent questions?
I think there's one question,
stage?
Leon, here, maybe just to, I think Riyadh Iqbal, he posed a question to Anu around small businesses and whether they should be concerned about cloud security.
Yes, Rihan from Escavox. Question for Anu. Should a small business be concerned about cybersecurity if most of their infrastructure is hosted on the cloud. Yes, that was one that came in earlier, and I might ask the panelists if, Robin, what about you to kick that off?
Yeah, sure, Rose. I think the short answer is yes, and I think Rianju's made some important points about some of the, I suppose, security considerations that come into play, irrespective of whether it's a in-house hosted system or whether you're accessing a provider's data or information through an API, or whether your infrastructure is hosted in the cloud. And I think we need to look at this from a whole of system view. And the cloud is one component of that system. And yes, a cloud provider is required to make security guarantees. And sometimes even with web hosting, you come across plans where security is an added feature, and you got to wonder the appetite for other products if security is not built into those products. But without digressing too much, I think a whole of system level view to security is important, and understanding how cloud fits into that is important as well. And the attack vectors from end devices that access the cloud and so on are quite well known. So, so yes, is my short answer. Yeah.
Maybe
Leon.
just to sort of add on to that, I think one of the challenges our industry, and this is holistically not just the food sector, is facing, there's no baseline of what good looks like. There's lots of industry standards. So I think something that would be valuable to the sector is if we can actually come up with what does a good security standard look like? Because there is this plethora of new technology. We're adopting a lot of vendors coming in, they provide secure systems and solutions. And I think there's something we pointed out in the agri-features report. It's almost like the food business is where healthcare was 5 years ago, because there's a lot more technology that's consumed. So I think something that we need to sort of really push hard for is we should come up with what is a good security standard for this sector look like, and then really start enforcing that that within the sector. Because if everyone is complying to that, and we know it's a good security standard, then I think we can trust each other. So if we come back to the question that Rian was asking there, and I think, yes, it is, cloud security providers probably provide better security solutions than in-house, because that's the nature of the business. But the important thing is trust but verify. And I think that's the point that Rui was making as well, is you need to make sure that when you integrate an API, yes, trust that it comes from a trusted supplier, but really need to go and verify. Show me your security controls and the protocols you've built into that API. Show me you've done some security testing. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility, it's your data. So you need to verify that where the data is going to and how it's connected into that environment is trusted. So maybe just sort of conclude, I think something that we should be pushing for, and seeing that the food sector is just been added to the 11 critical infrastructure sectors. We need to really advocate and push hard to develop our own security standard. Like we have seen now coming through, I mean, banking was the first one that through the regulators put security standards in place. The energy sector has got their own standards in place. Healthcare has got some in place. I think it's important that we as a sector really work hard to put that in place.
Thank you for that. Now we have a question that's just come in. Is it Eugene? Yes, Eugene. What are your thoughts on the popularity of MQTT with IoT devices? E.g., does not have inherent security features and require 2FA and logins, etc. This is in contrast with COAP in regards to applications in traceability. Okay, this is way above my pay level. This is a technical question. Therefore, Robin, we'll start you off on this one. Do you know what this person is talking about?
Sorry, my phone decided to go off at the wrong time. So I guess my response to that, Rose, is that when we are comparing different protocol frameworks or even tech stacks, it's hard, and all of them would have some security guarantees to some level, you would hope. And I always refrain from sort of saying one tech stack or one protocol is more secure than the other, because I think it really comes down to for two things. One is how are you using the protocol on what platforms and systems. In some instances, you're dealing with lightweight devices that can only support certain protocols that are resource-constrained devices that can only support lightweight protocols. And as a result of that, you can't expect the same level of security as perhaps a more a non-resource constrained device can support. But coming back to this specific question around MQTT and co-op, I think MQTT does serve a purpose. It's useful in application scenarios where you sort of have that publish subscribe type communication that is required to support your application. And if you find that there are security weaknesses that are identified because of the threat landscape that you're operating in or the risk posture for your particular business, then I guess the onus is there to try and make better decisions in terms of the types of protocols or tech stacks that you'll be using, or build in security. And often we build in security at the application layer if the underlying layers that the communication is occurring in do not actually support security in. So I suppose it's horses for courses is the answer, really. And in all situations and scenarios, being aware of the threat and risk landscape that you're operating in, and being able to mitigate those strategies, those risks that you've identified in, I guess, a secure by design fashion. Hopefully it's not an overused term, but just to finish off on that point, I think we need to recognize that we are now operating in a landscape where we no longer can sort of take that perimeter-based approach to security, where you say, okay, this is my infrastructure, I have control over it, it's protected, and then I will defend against compromise from outside this perimeter. We now need to recognize that we are inherently operating in perimeter-less environments, where your starting point really should be the assumption that in some shape or form there's a security weakness in your system, or even there is an adversary that's present within your system, and your security controls are able to mitigate against those threats. So it's, I guess, a bit of a broader answer than the specific city of the question, but yeah, I might leave it there and maybe hand over to Leon or Rianju.
Leon, care to comment on this one?
I think it's really, I support what was said there already. It's really about making sure that the adoption of new technology is a good thing, because we all want to innovate and we want to make integration a lot smoother. But it really comes back to the point that I was making before. We need to make sure that we at least understand the minimum security that we want to be compliant with, but also around the usability. And that's why a lot of these IoT devices are starting to be connected to the network, is to make sure that we faster and quicker integrating and processing data going through. It really comes back to, as I said before, we need to make sure we understand what good looks like, and then apply that consistently throughout the infrastructure and the network.
Thank you. Rianju, do you have anything further?
I'll just quickly add to that, is that for those, the non-technical people on the call, so MQTT, it stands for Messaging Queue Telemetry Transport. And this is an Internet of Things which is designed for standard messaging protocols. So it is ideal if you're just looking for an extremely lightweight messaging transport that is just ideal for connecting remote devices with small code footprints. So not much effort is put into ensuring that you're putting expensive IoT devices out there in a farm and where there's minimal network bandwidth. So in the farming, in the agriculture space, there's probably a demand for MQTT devices or IoT, Internet of Things devices are coming up. It's moving up. But MQTT has been in use in other industries such as automotive manufacturing, oil and gas, because these are always, especially oil and gas, they've been dealing with this in the remote regions where there is network bandwidth issue. So that's what I just wanted to clarify that for non-technical people out there going, what is this?
I was about to ask. So that's really great because with something like EPCIS, which is just reporting on one thing, yes, it's arrived, or in transport, a transport message that says I'm delayed or whatever, they're not a large bandwidth user. It's just a small message in the supply chain about an event. So I can see how combined with an IoT device where I've landed at the loading dock, for instance, that these light applications using IoT would be quite useful. All right, now we don't have any further questions. Anyone keen to put their hand up? There's no shame in ignorance, as I have richly proven. No? Well, in that case, I'd very much like to thank our excellent presenters and panelists. I've certainly learnt a lot this morning. We will be putting the recording on our website in the next few days. So we will notify everyone who registered, who may have missed it or had to go or whatever. So you can replay this in your lunchtime, because I know you'll all be keen to do that. Thank you very much for your time today. And at any time, feel free to make contact. I think that when you registered, you would have been able to access my email, and you can also contact Robin and he can get a hold of me. So thank you. Ian, whose hand is up. Great. Your question, Ian. No? Oh, he's taken his hand away. I know who Ian is, so we'll make contact. Okay. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we look forward to further events where we can learn more. Thank you.